Hello there, seeker of silence. Come closer to the glow of this small lamp and rest where the long shelves bend the air into something slower. You have arrived at Candlekeep in an hour most do not see, when the towers breathe and the stones remember more than they show. If these quiet stories bring you peace or help guide your thoughts along steadier paths, feel free to subscribe so that this watch may continue, night after night, among ink, dust, and old names. Now, let us begin. I am the last keeper awake in the eastern wing, where the oldest stair curves downward, and the candles are replaced by lanterns shaped long ago. My hands are marked by ink and age, my eyes trained by decades of reading words meant to outlast their writers. Before me, upon the oak table, rests a single scroll, bound with faded blue thread, its parchment worn thin at the edges, yet still whole. It is this scroll you have come to hear of, though you may not yet know it. Long before it found its place among these walls, before its seal was repaired and its script catalogued, it was sought by 4 travelers, drawn together by chance and by the quiet insistence of unfinished things. They were not heroes when they arrived at the gates of Beregost, only companions of circumstance. An elf, light of step and watchful of shadow, whose bow bore more nicks than ornament. A dwarf, broad of shoulder, his beard bound with iron rings etched by his own hand. 2 humans followed, one a hunter whose patience was his sharpest blade, the other a warrior whose shield had seen more roads than wars. Last among them was the mage, robes plain, eyes always drifting toward places others overlooked. Their names are written here, but names matter less than footsteps. They were told of a forgotten ruin, half swallowed by moss and low hills, where a scroll older than most kingdoms lay sealed within stone. No trumpets announced the task, no councils debated its worth. Only a map passed hand to hand, creased from use, and a warning spoken over a table worn smooth by travelers. They set out at dawn, the road pale with frost, their breath visible in the early air. The elf walked ahead, pausing often, as if listening to the ground itself. The hunter followed his signs without question, reading bent grass and broken twigs like a second script. Behind them, the dwarf muttered to the warrior about old halls and older traps, while the mage counted steps beneath his breath, measuring distance as others measured time. The road carried them north, past fields left fallow, past a bridge where water moved slow and dark beneath stone. At night they shared a small fire, its light kept low, their voices lower still. Stories were exchanged in fragments, never pressed, never completed. On the 3rd day, rain found them not heavy, but steady enough to darken cloaks and dampen leather. They took shelter beneath leaning pines, where the dwarf produced a flask, and the elf smiled in a way that suggested memory rather than humor. By the 4th evening, the land began to change. The soil grew thin, rock pressing close to the surface. The mage felt it first, a subtle shift beneath his boots, as if the ground itself remembered being shaped by hand. That night, they camped near a low rise, the ruin hidden just beyond it. No walls were visible, no towers, only stone half buried, and a faint line in the earth where something had once been sealed shut. They slept in turns. No dreams were shared aloud. At first light, they approached the entrance, the dwarf's fingers tracing old carvings worn nearly smooth. The elf found a mechanism, long rusted but intact. The hunter watched the tree line. The warrior adjusted his grip on the shield, more out of habit than fear. When the stone door finally shifted, it did so with a sound like breath released after long holding. Cool air flowed outward, carrying with it the dry scent of sealed parchment and stone. None of them spoke. They stepped inside one by one, leaving the morning behind. And here, within Candlekeep, as the lantern flickers beside me, The scroll rests open at the margin of that moment, waiting for the path ahead to be remembered. But that seeker belongs to the next watch. The air within the ruin was cooler than the morning outside, not cold enough to bite, yet carrying a weight that settled upon cloaks and thoughts alike. Their steps echoed briefly, then were swallowed by stone corridors that bent away from the entrance, as if the place itself preferred not to repeat what it heard. The mage lifted a small crystal, its surface catching the lantern's glow and spreading it farther along the walls. Symbols appeared where bare rock had seemed to rest, etchings shallow and uneven, cut by hands that valued purpose over beauty. The dwarf nodded at them, recognition passing through his eyes without ceremony. "Old warding marks," he murmured, voice kept low out of instinct, not meant to frighten, only to remind. They moved onward, the elf gliding ahead with care, his fingers brushing the stone now and then, as if reading with touch what sight alone could not offer. Once he paused, raising a hand. The others stopped without question. A line crossed the floor, nearly invisible unless one knew to look for the absence of dust. The hunter crouched, adjusted a thin wire with the tip of his knife, and the line relaxed, its tension fading back into the floor. No sound followed, only the sense of something avoided. Beyond it, the corridor widened into a chamber long emptied of ornament. Broken pedestals stood along the walls, their tops chipped and worn. The warrior rested his shield against one, testing the balance of the room with a glance learned from many roads. Nothing stirred. They shared a brief meal there, bread torn rather than cut, water passed hand to hand. The dwarf traced the edge of a pedestal while he ate, finding tool marks beneath the erosion. "This place was built by folk who planned to leave," he said, more observation than judgment. From the chamber, a stair descended, its steps shallow and uneven, leading deeper than the map suggested. The mage frowned softly, adjusting his count. Still, they followed. As they went, the walls narrowed, and the sound of their movement softened, absorbed by packed earth behind the stone. A faint draft moved upward, bringing with it the smell of old water and something else, dry and brittle. At the base of the stair, they found shelves carved directly into the rock, many collapsed, others holding fragments of scrolls reduced to flakes. The elf knelt, lifting one piece with care. Its ink had faded beyond reading, yet the script's shape remained. "Not what we seek," the mage said, his tone patient, "but proof we are close." They advanced through a low archway, the ceiling forcing even the elf to bow his head. Beyond it lay a narrow hall, ending in a stone door, unmarked by sigil or lock. Only a shallow groove circled its edge, filled with dust undisturbed. The dwarf pressed his ear to it, listening not for sound, but for absence. After a moment, he stepped back. "Solid," he said. "No tricks." The mage placed his palm against the stone, closing his eyes. Words passed his lips, not loud enough to be called speech. The groove darkened, dust shifting as the door eased inward. Inside, a single table waited, stone upon stone, and upon it, a scroll case sealed in blue thread. They did not rush forward. The hunter circled the room, checking corners and seams. The warrior stood watch at the door. The elf approached the table, his reflection faint upon the smooth surface. The thread was unbroken. Only when the mage confirmed the ward was dormant did the elf lift the case. It was lighter than expected, balanced, as if designed to be carried rather than hidden. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then, far above, a tremor passed through the stone, soft but unmistakable. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and the lantern flame bent. The ruin had noticed them. They turned toward the exit, their path already shifting in ways the map had not promised. And here, within these walls of Candlekeep, I pause my telling, as the ink dries upon this memory, and the watch continues into what followed next. The tremor passed as quickly as it had come, leaving only a faint drift of dust settling upon stone. No cracks widened, no alarm sounded, yet the message was clear enough for those accustomed to listening beyond words. They did not linger. The elf secured the scroll case across his back, adjusting the strap until it rested without shifting. The warrior lifted his shield once more, the familiar weight grounding him. The hunter took the lead now, eyes tracing the corridor they had already walked, seeking what had changed rather than what remained. The stair felt longer on the way back up, its uneven steps catching boots at unfamiliar angles. Above them the draft had strengthened, carrying the scent of rain and fresh soil. Something outside had shifted, or something within had woken. Halfway up, they heard it. Not a roar, nor the scrape of claw on stone, but the slow movement of something large settling deeper into the earth. The dwarf paused, one hand braced against the wall. "Old places don't like being reminded they're empty," he said, voice low, steady. They resumed faster now, though never careless. The elf checked the trapline they had disarmed earlier, finding it slack and harmless still. The chamber beyond remained unchanged, yet the air felt heavier, as if holding more than it revealed. At the entrance, daylight filtered in pale and narrow, the sun hidden behind cloud. Rain had begun in earnest, fine drops tracing lines through the dust at the threshold. They emerged one by one, boots sinking slightly into softened earth. The ruin behind them remained still, its stone door resting where it had been left, no sign that it would follow. They moved away without looking back. The hills offered little shelter, so they followed a shallow ravine where water had carved a path through rock. Rain darkened their cloaks, muted the sound of their passage. The hunter found signs of a road long unused, its stones half swallowed by moss. They followed it south, trusting in distance more than direction. By nightfall, they reached a stand of trees bent by wind, their branches low and tangled. There they made camp, a small fire coaxed to life beneath a canopy of leaves. The dwarf tended it with care, keeping the flame contained, its light barely reaching beyond the circle of their boots. No one asked to see the scroll. Instead, the mage checked the seals by touch alone, confirming that what lay within remained undisturbed. The elf watched the tree line, ears angled toward sounds the others could not yet hear. The warrior cleaned his shield, movements slow and practiced. The hunter ate last, eyes never leaving the dark between trunks. Sometime past midnight, the rain eased. Mist rose from the ground, curling low among roots and stones. A shape moved at the edge of firelight, then resolved into a traveler, cloak soaked, hands empty and raised. The elf saw him first, but did not draw. The stranger spoke with care, asking only for warmth and a place to sit. His voice carried the wear of long roads, nothing more. They allowed him close enough to dry his hands, but not to cross the circle. He spoke of weather, of a bridge washed out farther north, of a caravan delayed. He did not ask about ruins or scrolls or sealed doors beneath hills. When he left, he did so with thanks, and the forest closed behind him. Dawn found them rested enough to move. The rain had cleansed their tracks, and the road grew clearer with each mile southward. They spoke little, saving breath for the walk, trusting the path to carry them onward. Days later, the towers of Candlekeep rose into view, stone pale against the sea's edge. The mage slowed, a rare smile touching his face. The dwarf adjusted his pack. The elf watched the gulls wheel overhead. The warrior exhaled, a tension easing that he had not named. They approached the gate as travelers always did, bearing book and coin, offering knowledge in exchange for entry. And so the scroll passed from road-worn hands into the keeping of these walls where I now sit, lantern steady beside me as the memory continues to unfold. Candlekeep received them without ceremony, as it does all who arrive with offerings of worth. The gates opened on iron hinges smoothed by centuries of use, and the sound carried inward, a low call answered by the steps of robed keepers. The elf felt the change at once. The air within the walls held the scent of parchment and salt, of stone warmed by the day and cooled again by night. The dwarf glanced upward, measuring the towers by instinct, finding comfort in their weight and balance. The humans slowed, as travelers often do when roads finally end. At the registry table, the mage presented the scroll case with both hands. No flourish marked the moment. The keeper who received it examined the blue thread, nodded once and wrote their names with deliberate care. Ink dried quickly in that place, as if the walls themselves drew it in. They were given bread and a place to rest, but no questions followed. Candlekeep has learned patience. Stories arrive when ready. Later, in a chamber deeper than most visitors see, the scroll was unbound. I was there then, younger in body, no less careful in hand. The parchment unfurled with a sound like old leaves shifting, its script fine and precise, written by someone who expected to be read slowly. It spoke of paths hidden beneath familiar ground, of seals meant to endure not against force, but against forgetting. No spells leapt from the page, no warnings rang aloud. It was knowledge meant to be kept, not wielded. The four were thanked, as Candlekeep thanks all who contribute. Coin changed hands, though less than they might have earned elsewhere. None complained. They stayed only a few nights. The hunter left first, drawn back toward open land and changing weather. The warrior followed, taking a commission escorting a merchant south. The dwarf lingered longest, spending hours in the stonework of the outer walls, speaking with masons, sharing tools and quiet laughter. The elf remained until last. On his final evening, he stood beside the sea-facing parapet, watching the horizon darken. I joined him there, neither of us speaking for some time. "Some roads end," he said at last. "Others fold back into themselves." I nodded, understanding enough. When he departed at dawn, the scroll was already catalogued, its place secured among volumes that would outlast us both. Yet its story did not end there. For years after, I would hear echoes of those travelers. A note in a margin referencing the hunter's keen eye. A shield left for repair bearing the warrior's mark. A carved stone added to the outer wall, signed in a dwarf's careful hand. As for the elf, his name appears only once more, penned lightly beside a reference to woodland paths that shift with seasons. Now, as this watch stretches on, the lantern's flame dips and steadies. The scroll rests where it should, neither hidden nor displayed, waiting for the next reader whose hands will open it with care. And so the memory settles, not as an ending but as a page turned, leading onward into the long keeping of things worth remembering. Years have a way of passing unnoticed within these walls. Seasons announce themselves only by the light at the windows, by the salt carried farther inland on certain winds, by the cadence of footsteps in the halls. I remained, as keepers do, watching ink fade and be renewed, watching names arrive and depart. Yet the scroll did not sleep untouched. From time to time a scholar would request it, their fingers careful, their questions measured. Each came seeking something different. None took more than the page allowed. One winter evening, when rain traced slow paths down the outer towers, a young acolyte brought me word of a request marked with unusual care. Not urgent, not forbidden, but written in a hand that suggested patience learned the long way. I retrieved the scroll myself. The reader waited in a narrow chamber lined with atlases, lamplight settling into the corners like dust. He was not young nor old, his hair touched by grey at the temples, his posture shaped by travel rather than study. A hunter, perhaps, or something adjacent. He read without haste, eyes following the script as though he knew where it would lead. Now and then, his lips moved, not forming words aloud, only measuring them. When he finished, he thanked me and paused. "I walked part of that road once," he said, "no further than the hills." I said nothing. Candlekeep does not pry. He returned the scroll and left at dawn. Later still, I came upon a marginal note added in my own hand, written long ago, though I did not recall the moment. It spoke of the ruined stonework, of the way certain paths were designed to discourage return. Beneath it, a smaller note, written by another, confirmed the observation, adding a detail about water channels beneath the floor. The scroll had begun to gather voices. Outside these walls the world shifted. Roads changed, kings rose and fell. Yet the four travelers remained bound together in memory, their paths crossing this place like threads woven once, never to be undone. On a spring morning heavy with mist, the dwarf returned. His beard had grown longer, rings replaced with simpler bands. He carried no offering at first, only a wrapped bundle of stone and metal. When he unwrapped it upon the table, it revealed a small carving, a door set into a hill worked with precision and restraint. "For the wall," he said. "So it remembers." It was placed near the eastern stair, where few visitors pass, yet where the stone listens well. Before leaving, he asked to see the scroll again. He did not read it this time. He only nodded, as if confirming that something remained where it belonged. The elf never returned, not in body nor in ink. Yet sometimes, when the windows are open and the wind moves through the stacks, I find leaves pressed between pages where no leaves should be, dry, unmarked, as though carried far. The warrior's shield arrived one final time, bearing new dents, its surface worn thin by use. It was repaired and sent onward, no address attached, only trust that it would find its bearer again. The hunter's trail faded last of all, scattered through reports of cleared roads and safer crossings. His work, like many such paths, left little trace beyond the ease of travel, and so the scroll remained, no longer merely a record of an adventure, but a quiet meeting place for lives that had once aligned. As I sit now, lantern steady, night deepening beyond the glass, I feel the watch pass gently onward, carrying us toward what comes next, without hurry, without demand. There are hours in Candlekeep when the walls seem to lean closer, not to listen, but to remember alongside you. It was during one such hour that the scroll drew my attention again, not by request but by presence alone. I had taken to reading it at the turn of each year, not in full, but in fragments, allowing its words to surface as they wished. On that night, the sea beyond the cliffs was restless, its breath reaching even the inner corridors, and the lantern beside me burned lower than expected. As I traced the script, I noticed a detail long overlooked. A margin mark, faint, not part of the original hand, nor of any keeper's ink. It was the work of a traveler, pressed lightly, as if uncertain whether it should remain. It marked a passage, describing a chamber beyond the sealed table, one the four had not entered. A space left intact by choice, not ignorance. The words spoke of restraint, of knowing when the road has offered enough. I closed the scroll then, understanding that some paths exist only to be acknowledged. Weeks later, a storm pressed hard against the coast. Rain fell in sheets and the towers groaned beneath the wind. Visitors were few, and the keepers moved more slowly, as if time itself had taken shelter. That night, a sound reached me from the eastern stair. Not footsteps, but the shifting of stone against stone, the smallest adjustment. I went to see, lantern raised. The carving left by the dwarf caught the light, its edges newly darkened by moisture drawn from the air. Nothing else had changed, yet the sense of recent movement lingered, like warmth after a hand is withdrawn. I placed my palm against the wall, a habit formed over many years. The stone felt firm, steady. Still, I whispered the names written in the scroll, not as summons but as acknowledgement. No answer came, none was expected. In the days that followed, a scholar from the south requested maps of forgotten roads. Another sought references to pre-kingdom seals. Their questions brushed against the same themes, circling without touching. I guided them gently, offering what the shelves allowed and no more. Outside, a new road began to take shape along the cliffs, planned by those who favored speed over memory. The hunter's work would have approved of its placement, I thought, though he would have walked it once and then moved on. On a quiet afternoon, I found myself at the parapet again, watching gulls trace slow arcs above the water. For a moment, I imagined the elf standing beside me, his gaze following paths invisible to most. The thought passed without weight. Back within the stacks, the scroll waited, its thread repaired where time had weakened it. I returned it to its place, between volumes that spoke of choice rather than conquest. Night gathered once more. Lanterns were lit in sequence, their glow forming a gentle constellation along the halls. As the last keeper withdrew, I remained, continuing the vigil. Not every story ends where it begins. Some settle into the stone, becoming part of the structure that holds them, and so the watch went on, unbroken, carrying the memory of 4 travelers forward, not as legend, but as a path that had been walked and left behind with care. There is a point in every long watch when the night feels neither young nor old. It was during such a stretch that a letter arrived bearing no seal, only a careful fold and a name written once, then traced again as if to be certain. The courier said little. He placed it upon the desk, waited until I nodded, and departed without lingering. The letter's paper carried the faint scent of road dust and oil, a traveler's habit. Its words were few. A crossing had been found near the old ravine, made safer by stones set with intent. No claim was made, no signature pressed. Only the suggestion that what had been left undisturbed remained so. I filed the letter beside the scroll, not as addition, but as echo. That same week, a group of novices gathered near the eastern stair, their voices low, their curiosity earnest. They had noticed the carving, the small stone door set into the wall. One asked if it led anywhere. "It leads here," I told them, and they seemed satisfied. Later, alone again, I traced the carving's lines with a fingertip. The dwarf's work had aged well, the stone smoothing where many hands had passed. It had become part of the wall, as intended. Beyond Candlekeep, the world continued its slow turning. The road south grew busier, then quieter again as trade shifted. A bard passed through once, singing fragments of a tale that nearly matched the scroll's account, though names had changed, and the ending wandered. He stayed for bread and shelter, then moved on, his song already altering with each retelling. I did not correct him. One evening, as dusk stretched long shadows across the tables, a woman approached the registry carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her hair was bound simply, her hands steady. When she opened the bundle, it revealed a small book, its cover worn smooth by use. "My teacher walked with them," she said. "He spoke of a place that taught him when to stop." The book contained observations, sketches of terrain, notes on creatures encountered and left unharmed. At the back, a single page described a ruin entered and departed without loss. We accepted the book. As I shelved it, I noticed the script matched that of the hunter, older now, yet unmistakable. The line had continued longer than I had known. Night deepened. The sea calmed. Within the keep, Lamps were extinguished one by one. I remained, as always. The scroll rested where it belonged, no longer alone in its remembrance. The paths it described had faded from common use, yet they persisted in stone, in margin notes, in small acts of restraint. And so, as the watch carried on, the story widened, not through repetition, but through quiet accumulation, each presence adding weight without burden. The lantern beside me flickered, then steadied, and the night leaned forward, ready for what would come next. There are moments when Candlekeep feels less like a fortress of stone and more like a harbor, where stories arrive weathered, tie themselves briefly to the shelves, and depart again changed. It was during such a season that I noticed how often the scroll was being passed by, not taken down, not requested, but glanced at in passing, as one might acknowledge a familiar landmark along a road. Scholars paused before its shelf. Keepers adjusted its placement with care beyond habit. Even visitors unfamiliar with its script seemed to linger nearby, their attention drawn without knowing why. One evening, as the light outside softened into copper and blue, I encountered a young mage seated at a long table, maps spread before him. His expression thoughtful rather than urgent. He did not ask for the scroll, yet his questions circled close. "Have you ever chosen not to open a door?" he asked, "even after finding the key?" I answered as the keep teaches us to answer. "More than once." He smiled, folded his maps, and left behind a small note of thanks, written in a hand still learning patience. Later that night, I returned to the eastern stair. The stone door carving caught the lantern's glow once more. Its lines had softened with time, yet the shape remained clear. I thought of the dwarf's hand, steady and deliberate, shaping something meant to endure without drawing attention. Beyond the walls, the sea lay calm, its surface broken only by slow-moving ships. Some carried goods, some carried people seeking knowledge, some carried nothing but distance. A message arrived from the south not long after, delivered by a caravan guard who spoke plainly and left quickly. A bridge once damaged by flood now stood firm, reinforced with stone set low and wide. Travelers crossed without remark, unaware of the work beneath their feet. I placed the message with the others, each note forming a quiet ledger of effort made and left unnamed. As the years pressed on, I found that the memory of the 4 travelers no longer arrived as a single thread. It came instead as intersections, a hunter's caution reflected in a student's careful step, a warrior's steadiness mirrored in a guard's watch, a mage's restraint echoed in spells left uncast. An elf's awareness present in the way some readers turned pages, attentive to what lay between lines. One night, while copying a passage from a different volume, I paused mid-sentence, struck by the realization that the scroll had done what it was meant to do, not by revealing hidden power, but by teaching when enough had been found. I returned it to its place, aligning it with the edge of the shelf, a gesture small and complete. The lantern burned lower, the halls grew still. Outside, stars emerged one by one, their light reaching the sea and turning back. The watch continued unbroken, carrying forward not the thrill of discovery, but the steadier comfort of knowing that some paths, once walked with care, do not ask to be walked again. And in that knowing, the night deepened, ready to carry us gently toward its close. As the years layered themselves quietly upon these stones, I found that memory no longer arrived as recollection alone, but as presence. The scroll did not call attention to itself, yet it shaped the rhythm of my watch, marking time in ways clocks never could. On an autumn evening, when the air carried the scent of distant smoke and drying leaves, I was joined by a keeper newly assigned to the eastern wing. He was careful in his steps, his questions measured, his gaze attentive to the spaces between shelves. "You've kept this watch a long while," he said, not as inquiry, but as recognition. I nodded, and together we moved through the rows, our lanterns casting overlapping halos along the spines of books. When we reached the place where the scroll rested, he paused. "I've noticed," he said, "that few ask for this one, yet many seem changed after passing it." I smiled, a gesture more felt than shown. Some stories work that way. Later, alone again, I took the scroll down, not to read, but to feel its weight, the balance of parchment and thread. It carried the marks of careful handling, the kind left by those who know when not to press. I thought then of the 4 travelers, not as they were when they entered the ruin, but as they became afterward. Lives shaped not by what they claimed, but by what they returned intact. The hunter choosing routes that spared more than they crossed. The warrior standing where presence alone was enough. The mage learning that restraint could be a form of wisdom. The elf walking paths that bent around rather than through. Their story had not ended in triumph nor in loss. It had simply folded back into the world, leaving it marginally better aligned. Outside, the sea reflected the moon in broken silver, each wave catching light briefly before letting it go. A ship passed along the horizon, its lanterns distant and steady. I wondered who aboard might one day pass through these halls, drawn by a question not yet formed. Within Candlekeep, the night watch shifted. Footsteps moved away, doors closed softly. The keep settled into itself. I returned the scroll to its place, my hand lingering for a moment on the shelf, as if acknowledging an old companion. Then I extinguished the lantern nearby, leaving only the faint glow from the corridor beyond. Sleep comes more easily when stories know how to rest. As the hour grew late, I felt that knowing spread through the stones, through the shelves, through the long memory of this place. Only one watch remained. The final watch is always the lightest, not because it carries less, but because it no longer asks to be held. The night thinned beyond the windows, stars fading one by one as the sea took on the color of slate. Within Candlekeep, the halls rested in a state between darkness and morning, where even footsteps seemed to pause before moving on. I remained at the eastern desk, the scroll secure upon its shelf, the carving in the wall dim but present. No requests came, no doors opened, and that too was part of the keeping. I thought again of the 4 travelers, not as figures bound to a single road, but as echoes that had found their place. They had sought something, found it, and carried it only as far as was needed. Then they had released it, trusting stone, ink, and time to do the rest. Outside, a breeze rose from the water, lifting the edge of a page left open nearby. I turned it gently, allowing the book to close without sound. There would be no more reading tonight. Somewhere beyond these walls, roads waited to be walked, bridges to be crossed without thought, ruins to remain undisturbed beneath their hills. Not every story needs to be revisited to remain true. As dawn approached, the lanterns were extinguished in order, their light passing on like a relay finished. I took one last look along the shelves, seeing not objects but the patience that bound them together. The scroll rested, neither calling nor fading. The stone remembered, the sea breathed. And so the vigil eased into morning, not with an ending, but with a settling, as if the world itself had exhaled and found no need to draw the breath back in just yet. Rest now, seeker of silence, and let the paths you have followed tonight fold gently into where you are.